Hello, everybody. Shalom. How's everyone doing today? I think you'll be able to see the subtitles, right? I think so. I want to block the way. So it's a pleasure to be here with you today. And I'm going to be talking, I've been asked to talk about fasting, and which may not be what you've been thinking about, right? You probably don't go around thinking about fasting all that much. But I hope by the time I'm done, you'll understand why it's something important to understand. Okay? Around 2,500 years ago, Hippocrates, the famous Greek physician, said, "Let thy food be thy medicine, and thy medicine thy food." And most of you probably know that quote. That quote has led people to do all kinds of things in the name of health, using herbs, looking for other substances. But what most people don't know are the words that Hippocrates said next. Immediately after that first statement, he said, "Let thy food be thy medicine thy food." But to feed yourself when you're already sick is to feed your sickness. What Hippocrates did was he fasted his patients. Now, fasting sounds crazy to most people, and I can remember 30 plus years ago when it sounded crazy to me too. But what happened to me was I got very sick at 23, sicker than anybody I knew, later diagnosed with chronic fatigue syndrome, irritable bowel syndrome, chronic sinusitis, systemic candida, and 57 allergies. And all I knew was conventional medicine. So I went to my doctor. And over the next 3 years, I saw 3 doctors, and I got sicker all the time. And I may not be the quickest guy in the world. It took me a little while to figure out that medicine wasn't helping me, it was making me worse. Now today, many of you already understand that medicine is pretty much exclusively about suppressing symptoms. It doesn't address the underlying cause of the problem. And if you don't address the underlying cause of the problem, your likelihood of getting well is not very high. And so you can take drugs for the rest of your life, which is what happens if you've got hypertension. You probably know somebody with hypertension, don't you, sir? Probably everyone you know, if they're still alive, has hypertension. Because past a certain age, that's what happens. Okay, and these people are told specifically, you're going to take this for the rest of your life. What they're saying is, it's not going to make you better. It's just going to treat symptoms. Now, you might want to treat symptoms. We have enough people here, you don't have to raise your hands, but with a group this size, there's at least 10 people here that actually enjoy pain, right? You know who you are, okay? But most of us, if we feel bad, we don't want to suffer. If someone says, "Hey, if you take this, you'll feel better," we say, "Why not? Why not feel better?" The reason why is very simple. The substances that people use in order to feel better, and this is true whether it's pharmaceutical drugs or it's herbs or it's anything else. Medicinal substances are substances which are toxic to the body and which the body reacts to in a way that creates symptomatic relief. So we feel better, but we've actually made our bodies more toxic. And so the result of that, inevitably, is we become sicker with time. And so the official statistics say, you might have heard the big news in the last week, cancer is now the #1 cause of death. It just surpassed heart disease, which is number 2. Anybody know what number 3 is? It's a condition called Iatrogenic Disease. And what that means is mistakes of doctors in medicine. Doctors kill more people than anything besides cancer and heart disease. That's the official statistic. The unofficial statistic, some people say they kill more people than anything. Okay, and they're not bad people. They mean well. They've learned a system that only suppresses symptoms and makes people sicker. Okay, so that's the paradigm that probably every one of us here grew up with. I certainly did, and I'm sure you did too. Does it work? Not very well. Okay, are we becoming healthier? No, not at all. We're becoming less healthy all the time. So today people live longer than they lived 100 years ago, but at what level of health and vitality? What I want you to know is what's available to you. Just how amazing we can feel and function. Because most people have no idea. What happens to most of us today, a baby born in a hospital, and most of you were probably born in hospitals, I was. Baby born in a hospital today, within 2 hours of being born, is being injected, vaccinated, which means injected with toxic substances, and their health begins to decline from that moment on until they die 79 years later, on average. Which, by the way, is around 2/3 of what physiologists say we could accomplish. So we're not doing very well. Okay? Now, what's possible? Well, I went from being the sickest person I know to being one of the wellest people I know. It's now been 32 years since I've been sick one day. A single day. Okay? I've got more energy than a busload of 11-year-olds. How old am I? I'm 29. Squared. Okay, I turned 58 back in May. Thank you. It was actually pretty easy. It just happened. Didn't have to do much. Okay, but the point is, at any age, at 58, 68, 78, 88, and beyond, you can still be feeling and functioning incredibly well. And fasting is a key. Now, today, fasting, fortunately, a lot more people know about fasting than they did 20 years ago. Okay, you know what happened for me was, I got so sick and I didn't know where to turn because I grew up in a pretty conservative area, health-wise. Washington, D.C., all we had was conventional medicine. And when conventional medicine failed me, I didn't know where else to look. I'd started studying nutrition at 15, so I went back to nutrition. Right? Nutrition at 15, that's weird, isn't it? Who studies nutrition at 15? You know what happened? In my 14th year of life, I grew 25 centimeters in height without gaining a single pound. I look like a stick with a nose. Okay? And you know, hormones are kicking in. I'm like wanting the girls to find me attractive, and I look like a stick with a nose. So I thought, maybe if I start paying attention to what I eat, I learn something about nutrition and work out, maybe I can build some muscle. And that's what I did. So 10 years later, 11 years later, at 26, I go back to nutrition when medicine fails me. And I realized I was doing everything conventional nutrition said I should do, and I was still sicker than anybody I knew. And I thought, what's wrong with this picture? And so I came to the realization that perhaps many of you came to, and that is that animal products didn't serve me. That our physiology, you guys realize we have the same physiology, right? Years ago, I was standing at an organic market, and I'm talking to a woman. She's standing in front of a rack of raw vegan crackers and cookies. And I said, do you eat a lot of raw food? And she said, no, but I eat a lot of other stuff. And I thought, well, it's one or the other, right? And then she looked around furtively, and she leaned in, and she said, I eat a lot of meat. I must have had a horrified look on my face, because the next thing she said was, what's wrong with that? And I said, well, you don't have the physiology of a meat eater. And she took a step back, and she looked at me, and she said, you don't even know me. So I don't have to know you to know that your digestive system looks like mine. That every species on the planet has a species-specific diet. It's a natural diet that animal can go out into its natural environment and find, right? Maybe you've noticed that when a bunny rabbit hops by, your mouth doesn't water. There's no desire to pounce on it and bite through its jugular vein, but that's exactly what happens in the mind of a carnivore, right? So I gave up all animal products 32 years ago. The next thing that occurred to me was, if I'm trying to find a natural diet, it can't include processed food. And you know, I appreciate the fact that there are vegan food producers that are trying to create things so that people who want to eat normally can eat that stuff. But frankly, where you're going to find health is eating natural food, real food, stuff that grows on trees and grows out of the ground. Okay, that's all I consume, and it's what I'd recommend you do as well. Okay? because that's our natural diet. For me, it's fruit and soft, tender leaves. But at the same time, I'm looking at way back when, I'm trying to figure out how to take my health to where I wanted it to be. And I realized that every other animal, 25 million species roughly, I haven't actually counted them all. I started to, I got to 10, ran out of fingers and toes. Every species fasts when it's not well enough. Okay? In fact, if you can think back to when you were a child, when you got sick, you lost your appetite. Why? Because your amazing, virtually infinitely intelligent body knows that in order to cleanse and heal itself, it can't put all that energy into processing food. Processing food takes roughly half your body's energy. So if your body needs to cleanse and heal, the last thing it wants to do is have to process food. And so we lose our appetite. And so I reasoned, well, if this works for every other species, maybe it'll work for me too. I actually came across a book written by a guy who'd been dead for 75 years. And this is going to be shocking for those of you under 25, but we didn't have internet. There was no Google. There was no YouTube. How did people survive? This was a crazy time, right? So I was on my own. I had this book by a dead guy, and he's talking about people going weeks without eating, and I thought, it sounds interesting, but is that really possible? I wasn't so sure. Now, like some of you, is anybody here Jewish? Like some of you, I grew up Jewish, but only on my parents' side, both parents. And so I'd fasted every year for Yom Kippur one day. I knew I could do that. I didn't really know if I could survive 2 days, but I decided to try. So I parked myself close to the refrigerator, just in case. And I made it through 2 days. And then I did 4. And then I did 8 and 12. And I worked my way up to fasting for weeks at a time. And amazing things happened to me. When I started this journey, I was 4'10". Okay? Not really. No. But amazing things happened. I went from having no energy, unable to think clearly, unable to do anything. I spent 3 years in bed most of the time because I couldn't do anything else. And I went from doing that to becoming just as active as I had been until that point, when I was 17, 18, 20 years old. It hasn't changed, okay? I'm still as active as I was back then. And I went from being able to do nothing to being able to do everything I choose to. Fasting was the key, right? Fasting was the key. So what happens, it turns out, is amazing. And some of you know, and some of you may not know. What happened for me was so powerful. I was actually running a small commercial real estate company. But what happened for me was so powerful. The change in me was so amazing that people I knew, if they hadn't seen me for 6 months, they'd come up to me and say, "Oh my God, you look amazing. What did you do? Could you help my sister? Could you help my father? Could you help my child?" And it feels good to help people. So I started spending more and more time giving people advice and less time running my business. And it took me about 5 years. As I said, I'm not the fastest guy in the world. It took me about 5 years to figure out this is a bad way to pay the bills, right? And so I closed the real estate company and decided to be a health coach full time. That was about 27 years ago, yeah. And I looked around, and people knew that my clients knew that I was fasting myself, and they wanted me to take them through the process. But I didn't have any training. I didn't feel like I had enough experience yet. I wound up opening a fasting center 22 and a half years ago. Some of you know. I run the Tanglewood Wellness Center. We're 22 and a half years old. We've taken thousands of people through fasts, and I'm glad you're sitting down because they average 26 days. 26 days without food, just water. Okay? Now, some of you think that's impossible. That sounds crazy. But the truth is, most people have an 8-week reserve, could survive 8 weeks or more if they fast properly, if they know what they're doing. And amazing things happen when they do. So let me give you a sense of what I'm talking about. Medicine says hypertension is incurable. We talked about that earlier. You're on drugs for the rest of your life. So far, we fasted more than 300 hypertensive clients. 100% of them came off medication and had below normal blood pressure. Every one of them. We fasted more than 75 type 2 diabetics. Every one of them healed. No need for medication, normal blood sugar. Okay? We see people healing from Lyme disease, from multiple sclerosis, although that's more challenging, from cancer in some cases. Okay? Our bodies, like every other organism, our bodies are self-healing. They're meant to heal themselves. The problem for most people is that they're in the way. The body can't heal because people are constantly making choices which make it impossible for that to happen. And fasting properly is simply about getting out of the way. So what's happening? Some of you have probably heard the term autophagy. Autophagy is when the body goes in and eliminates bad tissue, stuff it doesn't want, breaks it down, consumes it, takes whatever it needs, gets rid of the rest. When we're fasting, this is happening. It's always happening, but it's happening much more efficiently. In fact, the 2016 Nobel Prize for Medicine went to a Japanese PhD named Yoshinori Osumi for his 25 years' work demonstrating that autophagy happens much more effectively, as they say in science, in starvation, when we're not eating. Okay? So when we're fasting, the body is eliminating the garbage. Okay? The body is actually literally growing younger because we're pumping high levels of human growth hormone when we fast. And so we're literally becoming younger in every measurable way, and ways that aren't so easy to measure. But for instance, some people say, well, so it must just be amazing genes that have me looking so incredible, right? No, it's not. It's not genes. My little sister, she's a year younger than me, 14 months younger, just had one of her knees replaced and is about to have her other knee replaced. Okay? Because that's what happens to people when they get close to 60 sometimes. Stuff wears out. When I was 18, I was diagnosed with a congenital knee defect. It made it difficult for me to bend my knees or straighten them sometimes. At the time, I was a cadet at the U.S. Air Force Academy, and that's in Colorado Springs. So some of the best skiing in the world, in the U.S. at least. And I love to ski, but I had to wear big braces on both knees with metal hinges in order to support my knees. Okay, when I was 18. When I was 54, I decided I'd been body surfing since I was a little kid. I was a competitive swimmer for many years, 18 years. And so I loved to body surf waves, big waves. I always forget, I think, I'm going to the beach. And then I get there and it's like, oh, it's like a big lake. And I grew up on the Atlantic Ocean, big waves. I live on the Pacific Ocean now, close, big waves. But I love to body surf, but I thought maybe it's time to learn to surf a surfboard. Same action as skiing, except now at 58, I don't need braces on my knees. So while my sister's having her knees falling apart, mine are actually healthier than they were 40 years ago. Okay, this is what's possible. I've got 6 siblings, actually. I think I counted them right this morning. They all have glasses, at least for reading. My vision's still better than 20/20. That's because of fasting. That's because of optimal diet. That's what our bodies are capable of. Okay, we're capable of functioning at an amazingly high level. And really, my purpose for being here, I mean, I'm not sure why they invited me. I think it's just because I'm good looking. But my purpose for being here is to help you guys understand what's possible for you. Because if you want to feel and function amazingly well, you can. Okay, you've got glasses on. Several of you do. I just got a message from a client from Venezuela who's 62, just completed a 30-day fast with us and said, I don't need my glasses anymore. Okay, that's what happens, right? So you want to be clear that you can accomplish pretty much anything physically and mentally. Because, I don't know about you guys, I hear all the time, that people are having less and less mental clarity. Anybody had an issue with this? A little brain fog from time to time? It's becoming more and more common. And yet this disappears for people when they fast long enough and properly. So that's really my purpose for being here, is to help you understand what you're capable of creating if you want to, if you're willing to. See, I believe that every one of us is part of that divine creative energy of the universe. We're part of it. We're not separate from it, right? One day, we were in our first location 20 years ago, and I saw this group of people approaching the front door of the building, and I thought, I could see the men were in dark suits and the women had on these dark dresses, and I thought, I know what's about to happen. IBM is coming. No, it wasn't IBM. So the doorbell rang, I opened the door, and it was Jehovah's Witnesses. And you know, they believe their job is to convert everyone. And so one of them said to me, do you have a relationship with God? And I said, I am God. Because I didn't really want to have a long conversation with a bunch of Jehovah's Witnesses. But I meant that. I meant that in the same way that if you go down to the sea here and take a drop of water, that drop of water is part of the sea. We're all part of that energy. Okay? We are creating everything that shows up in our lives. Each of us is responsible. Can you hear me now? There we go. So each of us is creating our lives, okay? And if you're willing to take responsibility, there's nothing you can't create. There's nothing. But how capable of creating the amazing things you're capable of creating will you be if you're not feeling and functioning as well as possible? So for me, physical health and vitality, that's just a tool. It's a means to an end. It allows me to create whatever I want to, okay? So if you're not already manifesting everything you'd like to, you might want to take a look and see if there's something missing there, okay? So, fasting. Now today, a lot of people are familiar with the term because of intermittent fasting. And I want to take you through and talk about that as well. So what is intermittent fasting? Intermittent fasting means that for some portion of the time, you're not eating. Well, everyone's always intermittent fasted, at least from dinner to breakfast, right, in English and French and Spanish and Portuguese and Italian. The first meal of the day is break fast. We're always fasting. The problem is that if the fast isn't long enough, it doesn't have much impact because there's a series of stages that occur. And it takes the body about 3 days, normally, to get to the point where we're consuming fat as our primary source of fuel. Is that important? Well, where do we store most of the toxins in the body? Anyone? In the body fat. We store in the body fat. The liver's job, some of you said liver, the liver's job is to break down those toxins. But toxins that can't be eliminated from the body are typically stored in the fatty tissue. Why in fatty tissue? Because that's where it's safest to store them, where they're going to do the least damage. This is whatever the body can't get rid of. Obviously, if it can get rid of stuff, it's going to. And so we eliminate through the colon, through the urinary tract, through the skin, through the breath, through the mucous membranes. These are how things leave the body. And the body's going to do everything it can to eliminate whatever it's able to. Again, the problem for most people is that the way people live their life and what people are consuming and over-consuming, the body's ability to outprocess these toxins, it's not very good. It's not happening very efficiently, and it's not happening very effectively. When we give the body the conditions it needs, what happens is amazing. Okay? And this is why we see with longer fasts, we see amazing things happen. But people see benefits happening even with intermittent fasts. I mean, so we've heard about 16-8. How many of you know what 16-8 is? This is where you fast 16 hours a day, and you have all your meals within a tiny little 8-hour window. But that sounds kind of like life to me, right? 8 hours, that means you could have your first meal at 10, your last meal at 6 o'clock. And that's fasting? That just seems like sort of a normal day to a lot of people. I would say, in fact, that for most of human history, most people could only afford to eat once a day, maybe twice. They weren't eating all day long the way people do today. About 3 months ago, I was on a trip, on a speaking tour, and I was on a flight, and on comes CNN News on the little monitor, and they're talking about this new intermittent fasting scheme, 12-12. Just restrict your caloric intake to 12 hours a day, and amazing things happen. And I'm going, really? What that tells us is that people are abusing their bodies. Some people. I once had a client, first call, right, we worked together via Skype, and the first call I said to her, how many times a day do you eat? And she said, what do you mean? And I said, what do you mean, what do I mean? How many times a day do you eat? And she said, well, do you mean just during the day or at night too? I said, okay, I'm game. Every 24-hour period, how many times? She said 12 times. She literally was waking up every 2 hours to eat. Now, here's the sad thing. If she were alive, she's not alive. If she were alive today, she'd be around 65 years old. The human body cannot tolerate that. Okay? One of the reasons that she's not alive is because she was eating all the time. Her body never had a chance to rest. So, what makes intermittent fasting powerful is the fact that we're not forcing the body to process food all day long. And so some people are going to see amazing things happen simply by restricting their feeding window, by eating in a smaller period of the day. But you want to be clear. It takes 3 days for the body to move into ketosis in most cases. It takes 10 to 11 days for the body to be fully into the deepest part of the process. How much benefit are you expecting to get in 16 hours? Because I'm not expecting much. Okay? Intermittent fasting is amazing, don't get me wrong. Years ago, I was at a health conference, 28 years ago, and I met a woman there. She was a raw vegan. She was the first raw vegan woman I'd ever met. I was a raw vegan. She was the first person I'd met that was also raw vegan. I did what any guy would have done. I hit her over the head and dragged her back to my cave. I thought she might be the only one. She lived about 700 miles away. I lived in Washington, D.C. She lived in Chicago at the time. I went to visit her about 2 months later, and the first morning she said to me, do you want breakfast? I think she said, are you hungry? And I said, yeah, because I interpreted that to mean, do you want to eat? And I'd eaten every single day of my life until then. Why would I not eat that day? And so she goes to prepare some food. She comes back a little while later with 1 plate. And I said, aren't you going to eat? And she said, no. I said, but you have to eat breakfast. And she said, no, I'm not hungry. I said, yeah, but breakfast, come on with me, it's the most important meal of the day, right? And she said, Lorne, I'm not hungry. And I was like, oh, whoever thought of eating when you're only hungry? Like, what a crazy idea. I'm a sport eater personally, right? Or I was. Just a hobby. What are you doing? I'm eating. Nothing else to do. Okay, that's most people, I think most calories consumed here in Israel, in the U.S., in the U.K., in most countries, I was going to say civilized countries, but I'm not sure that the U.S. qualifies. Gandhi once was asked, what do you think of Western civilization? He said, it would be a good idea. So most of the calories consumed, I think, in these countries are consumed to suppress emotions, not because the body needs calories. The average person's walking around with 2 to 3 months worth of calories on their body. They don't need to eat today, tomorrow, maybe in January or February. Really. People are eating to suppress emotions. And I asked myself that morning, I thought, Am I really hungry? When's the last time I was hungry when I woke up? I mean, think about this. You eat dinner, you watch TV, or you're active for a few hours. You go to sleep. You wake up in the morning, and you're hungry again? What did you do since the last meal? Why do you need to eat, right? I started wondering, do I really need to? So I stopped eating breakfast. That was the last day I had a regularly scheduled breakfast. That was 27 years ago. So I've been intermittent fasting now, keeping my meals to within a 4-hour window for the last 27 years. And it's a powerful thing. And yet, when I break a bone, which is another hobby of mine, so far I've broken 7 fingers, 2 ribs, both knees, and my right hip. 2 toes. I forgot the toes. Can't forget the toes. I'm trying to back off a little bit, but I've always been engaged in some sort of adventurous type things. So I've broken fingers surfing and rock climbing, and I rolled my quadricycle a couple of years ago down a hill and broke 2 toes, etc. Whenever I have a serious injury I need to heal, I fast. But not for 16 or 18 or 20 hours. I fast for 1 or 2 or 3 weeks to allow my body the time to really heal. Because what happens in less than a day or even a couple days is nothing compared to what happens over the course of weeks. It's a completely different thing. Okay? And this is why we're fasting people on average for more than 3 weeks. Okay, this average is 26 days. We see amazing things happening sometimes in less time, but frankly, the most amazing things we've seen lots of miracles. I mean, lots of them. I've already told you about whole groups of miracles of people with similar conditions, but things that you probably would think would be impossible. So far, I fasted 2 groups of blind people, and every one of them saw amazing shifts. Okay, there's one woman, when I first met her, from a meter away, she could see there was something in front of her. She couldn't see it was a person, but she could see there was something there. Because most people that are blind, they don't see nothing. They just don't see well enough to function. Okay? She fasted. She changed her diet. She learned some exercises to release tension from the eyes. Today, she drives a car. Now, she hits a lot of stuff. No, she doesn't. She doesn't. She doesn't wear glasses. She went from being completely legally blind to not needing glasses at all. Okay? This is what's possible. There was a guy who came to me a few years ago who, 27 years, he was 45 years old. When he was 18, he was diagnosed with severe arthritis at 18. So he was in terrible pain every single day. He was on painkillers every day of his life for 27 years. It was the 3rd or 4th day of his fast, 3rd day I think, he came to me with tears in his eyes. And he said, because he understood, and you're about to understand, you can't take drugs while you're fasting. Drugs are poison. Your body's trying to detoxify. It's dangerous to use them at all, but you can't do it while you're fasting. So he understood he was going to have to stop taking the pain medication. And he began fasting, stopped taking the drugs, and on the 3rd day he came to me crying and said, Lorne, he said, I'm in so much pain. I've never experienced this much pain before. I don't know if I can continue. So I taught him some techniques to reduce pain. These are things that are used by chronic pain sufferers. I taught him a couple techniques. I held his hand emotionally over the next week. And on the 10th or 11th day, he came back to me, again with tears in his eyes. And he said, Lorne, this is the first day in 27 years I've had no pain. It's now been 2.5 or 3.5 years. I can't remember which. I apologize. I work with a lot of people. He's still completely pain-free. No drugs. Okay? No drugs. Your body can heal. And some of you, there are people sitting here today who've been told you're going to have to deal with this for the rest of your life. Now, you have a choice to make. Okay? You can accept that, or you can refuse to accept that. Someone tells me something can't heal, I refuse to accept that. They might be right, but I'm never buying into that until I've done everything I can do. And if I were you, I wouldn't do it either. Okay? Fasting is the key. Fasting will allow your body to heal itself if you give it the conditions it needs. It's an amazing thing. Okay? It's an incredible thing that happens. Some of you are probably thinking, maybe you're too old, right? I get that question all the time. I had a gentleman come to me a few years ago. He was referred to me by a friend of his. He was scheduled to have an emergency tracheotomy. That's where they punch a hole in your throat so you can breathe and speak here with a little machine. Because he had a tumor in his throat that had grown to the size that he couldn't breathe very well, and he couldn't speak very well, and he had trouble swallowing. And his friend said, why don't you call Lorne? Maybe he can help you. And he called me, and I said, I've never worked with anyone with a tumor in their larynx before. But we've seen success with many other cancers. I said, if it's not growing really fast, you probably have little to lose. Maybe it'll help you. If it doesn't, you'll still be better off. Even if you have to go get treatment, your body will be much healthier and better able to handle the treatment. So he came to us, and he fasted for 30 days. When he got home, his son was waiting for him. His son, reason he'd been gone for 6 weeks, so it's 30 days fasting, 12 days refeeding. His son imagined that 6 weeks later, the tumor would be much larger, and his father would be in serious danger. So they rushed him to the hospital where they had a surgeon standing by, and they wheeled him into the operating room, and they couldn't find a tumor. It was gone. He turned 91 while he was fasting with me. 91. Okay? So I want you to be clear that what I'm sharing with you here today, this might not help everyone. Okay? It won't necessarily work for each of you. If you're sitting here today and you're already dead, this probably isn't going to help you. If you're not quite dead yet, then there's a chance your body can still heal. Okay? Give it the chance. Give it the opportunity. Okay? Fasting is a serious process. Okay? It's not something to be taken lightly. You should only do it with experienced guidance. If it not me, that's okay. Find someone you trust, someone you resonate with. But do it. Give yourself the gift, because it's amazing what happens when you do this. Truly incredible. Okay, we have people every session who leave us feeling better than they've felt in decades, and sometimes better than they've ever felt in their entire life. That's what's possible. Okay? So I don't want you to think for one moment that you're stuck dealing with anything that you're dealing with that you don't want to experience. You don't have to. Again, I want to be completely clear about this. I'm not saying everything can heal. Some things won't heal. Some things, sometimes it's too late. But how do we know? Do you know because your doctor told you that's the case? Because the doctors told every one of those 300 hypertensive people they were going to be using drugs for the rest of their life, and none of them do. They told every one of those 75 type 2 diabetics that they were dealing with something forever, and they weren't. We see these situations over and over again where people have been told this is a permanent situation, but it's not. So I don't remember who once said, those who say something can't be done shouldn't interrupt those who are doing it. Okay? Get clear about what you're committed to. And if you want to create an amazing level of health and vitality, hey, do what you need to do. Make it happen. I know you're busy. I know things are tough sometimes. But you know what? You've got two options. You can find a way to do whatever it is you need to do, or you can make excuses. It's going to be one or the other. It's up to you. When someone says to me, well, I can't I can't do that. I don't have the money. I don't have the time. What I say to them is, okay, I guess it's not important enough to you yet. They say, what do you mean? Well, when it is important enough to you, you'll find a way to make it happen. Because that's what happens. That's what we do. You've already found a way in your life to make all kinds of things happen that should have been too difficult for you to do. Okay, this is just one more. How we doing? 5 minutes. I'll take half a question. No. The question was, is it true that you should never initiate a fast unless you're sick? Okay? There's a school of thought that says exactly this. And their reasoning is that fasting is a perfect response to being sick. So when you have a fever, you definitely fast. If you have cold or flu symptoms, fasting is the thing to do. Fasting is your body, in this case, it's your body saying, hey, we're dealing with an acute crisis. The last thing we want to do is eat food. That makes perfect sense to fast under those conditions. But the question here is, should I not fast unless I've got that happening? No. Definitely don't wait until you have that crisis. See, the problem with humans and other species only fast when they have an acute crisis. The problem is most people don't die of acute crises. They die of chronic conditions. And when you have a chronic condition like hypertension or heart disease or cancer or diabetes or arthritis or any of these conditions, your body's not going to give you that message to fast. But fasting still helps you. It still gives your body the optimal conditions to cleanse and heal. It's still the very best thing you can do for yourself. Okay? Yeah, back here. Okay, so the question was, his dad has leukemia. I'm sorry, he's in a difficult situation, has lost a lot of weight. Is it possible for someone like that to fast? And unfortunately, there's not enough information. I can't stand here without having a lot more information and tell you whether you or someone in particular can fast or not. But we have fasted people with leukemia. It is possible to heal from leukemia, and there are cancers where someone's not going to heal because it's too late. There's no way to know. I mean, people with stage 4 cancer sometimes heal. We just had a gentleman with lymphoma who came in with huge tumors all around his face, lymph nodes here, under his arms, in his groin, and he left with almost all of them gone. Okay, stage 4 cancer. So it can heal. It won't necessarily always heal. There's just not enough information to be able to tell you. Yeah, back here. Can I explain more about the need to have guidance? Sure. Fasting is a completely natural process. The problem is we live under completely unnatural circumstances our entire lives. And so the average human body is toxic and dehydrated. And when I say toxic, there was a study in North America several years ago where they looked for 75 persistent environmental toxins, things like PCBs and dioxin and DDT, really nasty chemicals, most of which have been outlawed decades before. And what they found was the average person had more than 50% of them in their body in measurable quantity. And so our bodies are pretty toxic, and they're usually quite dehydrated. And in order to fast successfully and get as much benefit as you can and be as safe as possible, you need someone that understands the process. In the same way that childbirth is natural, but how many women would be willing to give birth to a child without having someone there that understood the process? Most wouldn't. Okay? Yes, sir. Yeah. Got it. Yeah, it's a really great question and something I'm sorry I didn't cover adequately. The question was, here's a busy guy, an MD, by the way. I wish I'd known that earlier. Can I fast while working? Is that possible? The answer is no. Fasting is about resting as completely as possible. The whole point is to conserve the body's energy so the body can use the energy to cleanse and heal. So you cannot eat while you're working, but you're going to hurt yourself. Okay, it's not a good idea. It's never recommended. You're not going to get the same benefits. You need to find a way, and when it's important enough, you would find a way. Don't wait till then, but you need to find a way to create that time. Create the time off. That's critically important. And I'm so sorry. I know there's more questions. Unfortunately, we're already out of time. I'm already over time. So we're already over time. I'm sorry. It's been a real pleasure being here with you today. Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.